Hey guys, another fantastic guest for you today, Raheem Kassam. How you doing, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. So for those of you who may not know who Raheem is, he is the editor-in-chief of Breitbart News London. Maybe you could later tell us whether you've met Darth Vader himself, Steve Bannon. You ran for the leadership of the UK Independence Party, and we're here to talk about today your just released book, No-Go Zones, How Sharia Law is Coming to a Neighborhood Near You. That's right, product placement. Clearly, you must have been channeling the courses that I teach in marketing. How you doing, Raheem? What's going on?
I'm good. Lots is going on in especially in Breitbart world right now. But to answer your question, I mean, Steve was my direct line manager for 4 years, and he is again now, by the way. So I was with him yesterday. I'm used to hanging out with him, and we're really glad he's back. We're sad for America that he doesn't get to be in the White House anymore, but we're happy for Breitbart that he's back.
Did you? I mean, I guess you can't necessarily relay any conversations that you've had with him, but is your sense that he's sad that he's left? Is he relieved that he's left? What's his general emotional state regarding that reality?
I'll just tell you. I mean, I can't say anything what he said, but I'll tell you what I gleaned from talking to him is that I think he understood. He got to an understanding that instead of relitigating these internal battles between like the internal Democrats, the White House Democrats, and himself, why doesn't he? I think he just thought, why don't I just go back on the outside and I'll be able to have a much bigger impact with Breitbart? And I think that's probably right. You can only achieve so much if 12 of your 14 hours working a day is fighting with your own colleagues. And I'm sure he's relieved to not be having to do that.
On a completely different level, I've been asked by various people to consider, running for politics, although I never thought of doing that. I've always been a professor. But then someone within the political system said that he actually thought that might be a good idea for exactly the reasons that you just enunciated, which is he thought that I would have a lot more influence continuing what I do on the outside, speaking on issues, rather than being sort of stifled by the political machinery. So I think you're onto something.
Well, when I ran for UKIP leader, like I pulled out of the race because like halfway through the race I realized, what am I doing? I'm giving up a massive platform in order to be put in front of a BBC camera just so they can abuse me 6 hours a day. It just didn't make any sense.
Right.
And so I don't think politics is the most influence people can have. People like you guys with your huge online presences, huge YouTube channels, big social media followings, you have much better impact than if you were running for dog catcher in Missouri.
Did you, speaking of the free exchange of ideas via all these mediums, did you hear about our recent, myself and Jordan, do you know who Jordan Peterson is?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Jordan Peterson, Oren Amite, who's a clinical psychologist, and Faith Goldie, a journalist with Rebel TV, former journalist with Rebel TV. We were going to speak at a event at Ryerson University in Toronto on the stifling of free speech on university campuses. Do you want to know what happened to that event?
Cancelled.
The irony was lost on them. So it's unbelievable. But anyways, go ahead.
The left, I just want to cap that off. In this country, in the United States today, instead of putting these people who are offended by everything, scared of free speech, scared of ideas, scared of people that don't share their worldview, instead of putting those people in padded cells where they belong, we're actually putting the entirety of America in a straitjacket. Think about that. That's what's happening today.
And well, what's incredible is that when the people who organized the protest or the shutting it down, they first put up a Facebook page with the insignia of the swastika, and no to fascists, no to anti-Semites, no to Nazis, no to white supremacists. I'm Lebanese Jew, right?
Yeah,
so,
no, you're the archetypal Nazi. I can see it in you.
All right, so let's now move on to sort of leading up to your book. But first, I'd like people to know about your personal history because you actually come from the Islamic faith. So tell us, what's your personal history and what was the process by which you lost your faith?
So I grew up in Shia Islam, in Ismailism and Nizarism as a sub-denomination of that too. And for those that don't know, that's a very liberal sect of Islam. In fact, most Sunnis would consider them to be apostates anyway. So there was no head coverings. Men and women sat next to each other in the mosque. I didn't suffer through the worst perils of Islam like many people around the world are forced to. But it still sort of wasn't free enough for me. Still wasn't good enough as far as I was concerned in my sort of way of thinking. And it got to I was 18 or 19 years old, and I would hang out with. I would still go to the mosque every week, but I was hanging out with one of my best friends in Uxbridge, where I'm from in London, called Kevin. And we'd hang out, and he'd show me. Yeah, I'm not saying we did smoke a lot of weed, but I'm not saying we didn't. and we would watch sort of Christopher Hitchens videos and Richard Dawkins videos and Carl Sagan videos, and I was reading Cosmos and Pale Blue Dot and all these sorts of things. And it dawned on me that actually, while I respect anybody's right to believe in whatever they want to believe in, it wasn't for me, and organized religion certainly wasn't for me. So that was the precursor. And then one thing happened one day that I'll never forget, which was I was being hectored by these I think they were Somalian guys who were in lectures with me at the University of Westminster. And they were telling me, "You're not a good Muslim, bro. You need to come to these lectures," and all this sort of stuff. And I agreed to go to one of these Islamic Society meetings. And as I was walking up the steps of the Little Titchfield Street campus in central London, these guys came out from the building walking towards me and said, "You don't want to go in there. They're showing videos of 9/11 and cheering and clapping and all that sort of stuff." And I remember, I didn't think about it then as a formative moment. I do now. But I do remember sort of turning on my heel, chasing my friend Richard down the street and going, "Wait for me, I'm coming down the pub."
So in a sense, the grotesque nature and the diabolical nature of how they responded to such a catastrophic event was sort of the epiphany for you.
I mean, I don't know that it feels to me like you're not a human being if you can celebrate suffering in any way, shape, or form. I mean, even when the United States is winning in war zones around the world, or when the United Kingdom is winning in war zones around the world, yeah, we're happy that we're winning, but we don't wish death on the innocent. We don't wish suffering on the innocent, and it was innocent people that died that day in the World Trade Center and in the Pentagon.
Whoa, wait a minute. That's blasphemous. If you are non-Muslim, you're not innocent by definition, man. Come on.
That is absolutely true. You need to. I'm glad you said that. People need to understand that this book says, this is a version called the Study Quran, by the way, which I commend to everyone. It has about 4 or 5 different interpretations of every verse in the book. And you have to understand, in this book, a non-Muslim is not innocent by definition.
So, 2 questions. First, how did your family respond or react to you leaving the faith? And then I'll ask a second question after. Go ahead. Answer that one first, please.
Honestly, we don't talk about it. We haven't talked about it for nearly 10 years now. I've never been chatty and friendly with my family anyway. I was always the black sheep or the curmudgeon in the family. So, we never used to talk about those things. So if I see them maybe once every 3 months or once every 4 months. We'll go out to a lunch. They'll ask, "How's it going?" They won't want any details. I'll order a beer. My mother will slap me across the wrist, and we'll go home. We'll go on our separate ways.
Well, I appreciate your courage. It's not easy to go against certainly one's family. You mentioned earlier that your particular sect of Islam is more liberal. Now, is it because it's a self-selection bias whereby people who are inherently more liberal are drawn to that sect, or are there specific doctrines within that sect that somehow liberalize the Islamic tenets?
Yeah, well, from what I know, and I'm not a scholar in Ismailism, but from what I know and what we learned, I would go to a Saturday religious classes every week for 14 years. It was more that they viewed Islam as a culture rather than a religion or a political doctrine, and they wanted to do what a lot of my Jewish friends do as well, which is use the religion as a buffet cart. You take and pick what you want. You don't have to subscribe to every single thing in this book here. And so they were more interested. They were always more interested, as far as I could tell, in making money in being like sufistic, in being spiritual internally and not projecting that outward. And actually, it was more like a bit of a social club, really. People would go to mosque on Friday. Yeah, you'd say your prayers and everything, but really we wanted to know what was going on afterwards. Were we going to a restaurant? Were we going, to the pub? Were we going to watch football, soccer, and so on and so forth? So it's strange because I know it wasn't always like that. And I've done my fair amount of research, but I know it wasn't always like that. But somewhere along the lines, and I think especially when they migrated into Western countries in the 60s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, they decided to be part and parcel of the West. And that's something that you're not getting with especially not with Sunni migration into the West. And you're not seeing it, very much on the Shia side either.
Now, the four Islamic schools of jurisprudence in, say, Sunni Islam, they would consider you officially, according to the doctrines, to be apostates. Is that correct?
I believe so. I mean, I've been told that many times by scholars and people who know this far better than me. I mean, I've never heard of a formal ruling about it, but it's like one of these situations like with the Ahmadiyya. They don't consider them Muslims, and they find them to be fair game. This is why you have Ahmadi Muslims being murdered in the United Kingdom at the moment by Sunni Muslims, Deobandi Muslims, people who follow the Hanafist school of jurisprudence, and the media, of course, whenever this stuff happens, goes, "Oh, look at this terrible Islamophobic attack," and then when it turns out that it's a Muslim on Muslim violence, they just shut up about it. I'm sorry about that.
No worries. I mean, this demonstrates to me something that I've talked about very frequently, the inherent sort of diabolical tribalism that religion grants you, right? So if you look, for example, at Orthodox Jews, and I've used this example before, in Montreal, there's an area where I live that is filled with Hasidic Jews. So these are already very, very Orthodox, they respect all of the traditions and the rules of Judaism. Well, within that already rarefied sub group, there are, on this side of the street, the ones who come from a Polish tradition, and this side of the streets, the ones who come from a Hungarian tradition, and I can't remember which one. One of them wears their socks on the inside of their pants. The other ones wear them on the outside, and they won't be caught dead marrying their children to those other heathen bastards. So even within the context of unbelievably Hasidic Jews, I'm able to come up with arbitrary demarcations to create this us versus them dichotomy.
Do you call that sexual discrimination?
Excellent. I think you might have just coined a new term. All right, so let's get down to the key tenets from your book. So I think my understanding, I've only went through part of your book because I only received it a few days ago. But you sort of go through the various countries where there are these no-go zones, and you speak of the experiences there. Tell us about it.
Yeah, look, so the way this book came about was basically I went to my publisher not to try and pitch a book, but to catch up with an old friend of mine who worked there. And he said to me, "Have you got a book to write?" And I said, "No, I'm not interested, thank you." And he said, "Come on, you must have something that annoys you." And I thought about it for a minute, and I remembered Anderson Cooper apologizing on CNN for saying that because somebody had said no-go zones in a segment, he went on after the segment and said CNN would like to apologize for the use of that phrase, and so that's what drew me to it. And I knew what I had to do. I had to go to Rinkeby, to Husby in Sweden, to Malmo, to Paris, to Brussels, to Tower Hamlets, to Dewsbury in Yorkshire, and Béziers in the south of France too. Beautiful place, which has its own little pockets of migrant enclaves where it got so bad, the lawlessness got so bad that they had to start using what they call animation prevention. I'm sure it's something that's lost in translation there. But they are migrants themselves, or second or third generation in a lot of cases, who put on this fake uniform, fake police uniform. They're given controls by the mayor of Béziers, and they go into these neighborhoods rather than the police going in. Because these kids, especially kids and teenagers and young adults in these neighborhoods, they don't respond well to the police. So they have to send migrant animation prevention. And that's in the book. But All of these areas differed. I didn't find two areas that I thought, oh, this is the same and this is the same, and therefore all of these places are no-go zones per se, flat out. Right. They all differed a little bit. For instance, in the Swedish suburbs, in Rinkeby, the police find it very difficult to go there, just like in Béziers. But the postal services won't deliver in some places. In Aulnay-sous-Bois, in the north of Paris, the buses wouldn't stop there. In Saint-Saint-Denis, in that street just off Saint-Saint-Denis, near this beautiful cathedral where all the kings of France are buried.
Soon it will be turned into a mosque, inshallah.
But it's funny you say that, because you've got the kings of France buried in this cathedral, and just a couple of meters down the way, I would say you have France buried. You have a foreign country right there. And I was there with a pretty young girl, and she was harassed and she was set upon and she was called all sorts of things. And I've seen that in Brussels, in Molenbeek as well. Of course, Molenbeek very famous for its terror links. And the same in Sparkbrook in Birmingham in England. And they all slightly differ. And it's funny. I took a New York Magazine author there a couple of weeks ago after I'd written the book. And because he was doing a profile on us, on the company, on Breitbart, and he wanted to come and see me in London. And so I took him out to Tower Hamlets in East London. And when we got there, we started walking around the streets, and these 3 or 4 Muslim guys came up to us, and they said, "You better get out of this neighborhood if you don't vote Labour," right? And of course they want people to vote Labour because it's a welfarist party in the United Kingdom, and they keep these people not having to work and in doing all the nefarious things they do while they're not working. And then we saw some graffiti on a shop front that said "Taliban are here," and I noticed his demeanor changed. Like, he stopped sort of carrying himself, upright, and he became very sort of nervous and looking around him. And in fact, if you read this article that he wrote in the New York Times Magazine about his experience with me there, he's very fair. And I said to him, "Do you think I oversell this?" And he said, "Well, actually, I think you undersell it." Right. And to say to a Breitbart editor that we're underselling the problems with Muslim migration, and the guy who's telling me works for the New York Times, that tells you something. That if these people bother, if Anderson Cooper bothered, can I swear on this, Skype?
Go for it.
If Anderson Cooper fucking bothered to go to these places himself, he wouldn't be apologizing, and just to use it again, he wouldn't be apologizing on CNN for this stuff. It's ludicrous.
So how do you explain? Because I've experienced exactly what you're describing when I will post something. I've been doing this. I've been warning people for many, many years. And in case you don't know my personal background, we escaped Lebanon because of our Jewish heritage, and so very few people would be as personally well read on the realities of what happens when Islam takes over a place. And I've been warning people generally, but using in particular the experiences that I'm seeing in Montreal, where I live, where we're seeing just a breathtaking quick Islamization of the city. Now, that doesn't mean that Montreal has turned into Yemen, but it means that until 2003, I had seen a single person wearing any Islamic garb. From 1975 to 2003, I saw one. From 2003 until today, I could walk out of my house and 20, 30, 40, 50% of the women are in Islamic garb. So just today, or I think it was yesterday that this exchange started, this is with a radio host from Montreal on my personal Facebook page. I had posted something where I said, watch now as the exodus of Jews that is taking place in Europe will start taking place in major Canadian cities. And then he asked me to explain what I meant by that. And, he sort of scoffed away. He's Jewish too, by the way. He scoffed at my, nativist. I mean, he didn't use those words. But how do you explain this complete disconnect from what your lying eyes are seeing?
Well, just on one thing you said earlier, I wanted to just add something to that. You will be familiar with the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and what you said about having the first-hand experience and the story you just told there, and I know it's incredibly poignant to you, and it's poignant to the Chaldeans who I interviewed in my book, who see Muslims moving into their neighborhoods in Michigan. And who she described it to me. By the way, very nice woman, very liberal woman, who's the head of the Chaldean community there in Sterling Heights. And she said to me, it's a form of PTSD for us when we see this stuff coming into our neighborhoods, because
I've used the exact same term with my wife.
Right, right, absolutely. And I just wanted to add, it's the same thing as your experiences there, as my experiences with Islam. I'm just reading here. I can't claim to know it off by heart. This one stanza from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, where he says, "The Quran, well, come put me to the test. Lovely old book in hideous error dressed. Believe me, I can quote the Quran too. The unbeliever knows his Quran best."
Incredible. So you go to these different zones. The no-go instantiation manifests itself in slightly different ways. What is common across all these no-go zones, they tend to be largely Islamic. So now let me put on my ostrich logic hat and say, oh, but Raheem, why are you such an Islamophobic bigot? That's only a demonstration of the fact that Muslims have not been properly accepted and welcomed in these societies. So to the extent that there is a commonality, it has nothing to do with the religion or the specific cultural values that they bring in these societies. It is a reflection of the fact that the host societies are rabid racists against the noble Muslims.
Well, that is true in a sense, if you think about it. I mean, it's true if your contention is that these people are uppity because we haven't accepted Sharia as the law of our lands, then yes, that's true. and that's the argument I would throw back at these people. You're absolutely right, and I'm glad you see that they want a full and total takeover. It's not about assimilation for them; it's about domination. You cannot be in two minds about this. When you go to these areas, you're right, they're predominantly Muslim neighborhoods, but counterintuitively, there are also neighborhoods, and these people would all class themselves as practicing Muslims, by the way. They would describe themselves as so, and they would attend mosque, and they see themselves as very devout. They come across pious, but at the same time, counterintuitively, there is a lot of gang activity in these areas. A lot of the drug trade goes through these areas. Sweden used to have, funnily enough, you never think about this with regards to Sweden. Sweden actually used to have a real problem with the Hells Angels biker gang, right? They used to run the drug trade, and actually the Muslims pushed them out. The Muslims took over from the Hells Angels and diminished what the Hells Angels were doing. So two things about Sweden that a lot of people don't actually appreciate was the case. Look, I won in 2014, I think it was. I was awarded the Islamophobe of the Year award.
Congratulations!
Thank you. I've got the trophy on my mantelpiece. By the Iranian Human Rights Commission. Now that is an organization as oxymoronically named as the Senate Intelligence Committee, as far as I'm concerned. And they're right in the sense that I am an Islamophobe. I mean, yeah, I understand that a lot of people go, well, hold on, fear of Islam, phobia is an irrational fear, and all this stuff. But let's, why are we beating around the bush here? The word is already pervaded. It pervades our media. It pervades our politics. We have to own it now. At this point, we're never going to get rid of it. We have to redefine what Islamophobe means. Islamophobe doesn't mean that I see a Muslim and I get offended or angry. Islamophobia is when I read what's in here, I worry about the future of human civilization, given the fact that we're accepting vast swathes of this in our communities unchallenged, untrammeled. We allow this preacher in California to say he wants to annihilate the Jews, and then a week later, I saw a report. Gosh, I'm not going to try and smear anyone, so I can't remember which news outlet it was, but there was a major news outlet that said, has issued a heartfelt apology. Right. How do you know it's heartfelt? How do you know what's in this guy's heart? He got caught saying he wants to annihilate the Jews, and he said, sorry about that, sorry for wanting to annihilate the Jews, and they called it a heartfelt apology.
Well, by the way, the similar guys to this one are probably about 20 minutes away from where I live, where he also in a sermon said roughly the same thing, the cursed, the enemies of Allah, may we win against them, may we annihilate them, and so on. Of course, this is just standard fodder within the Islamic text. I mean, there's endless amount of Jew hatred throughout these Islamic texts, and yet, and I've mentioned the story before, but it's worth mentioning it again. At one point, several years ago, I had been contacted by a Jewish woman who was a friend of mine, who had asked me to comment on whether there is, in the actual doctrines of Islam, any Jew hatred. And so rather than sort of, sending her 1,000 different references and historical cases and so on, I just sent her a link to a montage that someone else had put together, where you, in many, many different countries, where you see someone either on television or in a soap opera or at the mosque sermon, the unbelievable, it's impossible to imagine this type of genocidal hatred. Her response to me was, by my sharing that clip, in a sense, I was no different in my extremism. So she asks me to comment about Jew hatred. I share with her, I oblige her request, and her response is, well, they're extremists because they want to kill you, and you're an extremist because you're pointing to the fact that they want to kill you. So when you are this detached from reality, Raheem, do you hold out hope? Can we still turn this ship around?
No.
Really? We're dead? We're doomed?
Look at the demographic shift that's going on in Europe at the moment. Look at the failure of I'll be blunt about this. The failure of white people to fuck enough, right? In order to maintain their cultures, in order to maintain their birth rates. And, it's all well and good that you'll get people like you and people like me and people like Majid Nawaz and Dr. Zuli Jasser and Rahil Raza. And, you'll get some of many, by the way, migrants who profess Islam or have come from Islam, who actually do want to integrate and who do want to assimilate. But they don't. But the media and the politicians don't allow those people to dominate or rise to the top. The Southern Poverty Law Center, right, which, by the way, is the go-to place for every single media outlet in this country, in the United States, where I sit right now. They accuse Majid Nawaz, a practicing Muslim and a former Hizb ut-Tahrir extremist who left and founded a counter-extremism think tank, accuse him of being a hateful, bigoted Islamophobe. Why? Because he doesn't adhere to the Sharia. Okay? That's who CNN uses as experts. These hate mongers, these Soros-funded hate mongers, I would add. And so why would I believe we have a chance when the entire deck is not just stacked against us, but every time they shuffle the cards, they remove something that benefits us and they put in more that benefits them. It's not a deck of 52 playing cards anymore. It's a deck of aces that they hold and that are all theirs. And they've set up the language to be that way. They set up the culture to be that way. And with the demographic shifts and that in mind, I honestly struggle to wake up in the morning. I struggle to get out of bed. Before we started recording this, I told you. And by the way, we were recording this at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I told you that I had to put clothes on. Most people put clothes on before that time in the morning. And the reason I don't is because I'm so terrified of having to wake up and turn my phone on or pick my phone up and see another terrorist attack, another stabbing, another van attack, another Californian Jew hater being excused, and it gets to you after a while. I'm sure you get this. It gets to you after a while. And when you live and breathe this stuff too, like my job is the news, right? When you live and breathe this stuff too, and you see no respite, what the British government did the week after the Barcelona attack is to say that we need more van control. They literally said that.
Radicalized vehicles, baby.
But isn't that a parody? Isn't that what we were saying 3 months ago as a parody that would happen?
Yeah, it's incredible. Look, I've had these conversations with my wife where she will say, well, you're a very busy professor with a very active scientific career. Why do you have to weigh in so heavily? Why it puts so much strain on you. And it's precisely for the reasons that you just enunciated, right? I would love nothing more than to not think about Islam in the least bit, right? I loved when from 1975, when we escaped Lebanon with our heads still on our necks, till 2003, I didn't think or care about Islam. I met many Muslims. They were all lovely, didn't give a damn. I've probably met more Muslims that were nice more than most people, precisely because I come from that region. But I didn't have, Islam wasn't constantly intruding into my existence. And yet, from 2003 until today, there isn't a single moment where it doesn't intrude on me. And how does that happen? It happens in a myriad of ways. It happens in exactly the same way as you, where I turn on the TV and the first 7 stories are, here's what Islam did today in across the world. It happens when a Jewish student approaches me at my university and says, oh, I just want to tell you, professor, that several of us no longer feel safe exhibiting our Jewish identity in Montreal. It happens, I mean, in endless ways. It happens when some Muslim group wants a special dispensation to do their exams so that when it's time to pray, they could be left out of the room. It happens over and over and over again, right? There are 10,000 religions plus, yet there's only one that seems to constantly come up to my face, right? Now, this is happening when the demographics are still, quote, in your favor. Right? What people don't appreciate, even people who are supposedly sophisticated thinkers, is that it's a long-term game, right? It's inshallah, eventually, right? Sometimes it'll happen in 5 years, sometimes it'll take 500 years, but inshallah, and you mentioned earlier the Taliban. I love this quote by the Taliban. They say the Americans have all the watches, we have all the time in the world, right? So it doesn't matter that today we don't live under Sharia. With enough time, we will. This is what's happened to 56 countries that today are part of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. They didn't all magically go from zero Islam to 99% Islam in one day. Sometimes it took 1 month. Sometimes it took 100 years. What are your thoughts of this analysis?
Well, it's a brilliant analysis, and it needs to be heard by more people. So for the people who are watching this, make sure you share it just for that part of this interview. Look, in 1979, 100,000 women marched in Tehran to oppose the state-sponsored wearing of the hijab. And nowadays, we're not so far off from that, by the way. This isn't, we're not 150 years on, we're not 200 years on. And today we're told on our television sets, I'm looking right now at my television over there, it's showing CNN, we're told by these guys that wearing the hijab is a personal expression of faith that these women are choosing.
Female empowerment.
Exactly. And a friend of mine who will remain nameless, but may or may not have been the former leader of the UK Independence Party, whenever he sees a woman wearing a niqab or a burqa on a London street, he always says one thing, and I think it's very him to say this, and it's the right thing to say. He goes, "Why doesn't she look empowered?"
Exactly right. It's
we have that sardonic approach to things in Western tradition, and especially in my country. It's our sort of way of dealing with grief. I feel grief when I see this.
And I would add to that. I think satire and sarcasm is, if you'd like, similar to analogize to the surgeon's scalpel, right? It's very cutting. It cuts through bullshit, right? So if
they hate Charlie Hebdo so much.
Exactly.
People were writing screeds against Islam at the time. People were writing entire books about it. People were writing blog posts and all this sort of stuff, articles in mainstream newspapers, but they went after the satirists because it hurts the most. But my fear is we cannot satirize anymore because they use satire now. The left uses satire as a guidebook. 10 years ago, like 3 months ago, we were joking about van control. Now there's van control. 10 years ago, they did this clip. What's his name? Jeff Foxworthy and Larry the Cable Guy did a spoof, a politically correct version of that Dukes of Hazzard. And on the car in the politically correct version, the Confederate flag had been replaced with the rainbow flag. That was satire from 10 years ago. It's now they're using it as a guidebook.
Right.
Well, satire anymore because we're giving people ideas.
Well, because it demonstrates how your beliefs are built on a house of cards that you can't. If your idea is really superior to mine, then even if I attack it, whether it be seriously or through satire, you should be able to withstand that attack. But the fact that you are so sensitive to my satire itself proves that you are on shaky grounds. Correct?
Well, I can admit it myself. when I go on television or when I do anything in the media and somebody, like somebody needles me with satire, that is the only thing. I'm a huge egotist. That is the only thing that hurts me. If somebody calls me crazy, insane, Islamophobic, untrustworthy, all this bullshit, I don't care. It doesn't hurt me. In fact, if anything, it empowers me. But when somebody manages, and it doesn't happen very often, but when somebody manages to really needle me like that, that truly, truly cuts deep. And that is the same for you, for me, for everybody. And it's the same for Islam. And they cannot take mockery at all. So you know what? Mock them.
Now, what do you think it is your unique personhood? Well, yeah, there's kind of a heavenly ray that's coming on you. So you might be the next chosen imam.
I'm going to quickly sort that out for you.
Okay.
A better experience. Is that better?
Yeah, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's part of the experience.
It's still there.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry. It just makes you look more like you have a halo over your head. It's okay. There you go. What was I saying? I started asking a question. What was it? I don't remember. Do you remember? No, I lost my train of thought. All right,
I was distracted.
Don't worry about it.
Something shiny appears. I get distracted.
Sharia.
You're very you do a lot of satire on Twitter, right?
I do.
Do you do it? Do you do it in these?
I do. My goodness, I have.
Let's go. Let's hear it. Let's do the test.
Well, this, by the way, this is actually a toy for my children.
Yeah.
Right. But this has been coined the Aslan Uyghur Decoder 5000. Aslan for Reza Aslan. Uyghur for Cenk Uyghur, Decoder 5000. So, for example, if I open this up and I enter 9/11, then it will say the Jews. So, in other words, when I want to navigate through the nuances of the world, but not in my nativist neo-Nazi lens, then I always turn to the Aslan Uyghur Decoder 5000. So, I've got a whole series of Aslan Uyghur Decoder 5000. And then most people, of course, appreciate this and love the satire. But then once in a while, I'll get some naturally lobotomized moron who will basically say something like, oh, but you hurt your message. You're a serious professor. You're a doctor. You should. No, to the contrary. The fact that you use this very cutting satire, that's the best weapon that you have. But these morons don't get it.
Well, it's because they've been anesthetized themselves by watching Fox and CNN and all these guys who they only can get their point across in a very self-righteous manner.
Right.
They only have this. There's only two modes, and I'm sorry, I know there'll be a lot of Americans who take offense at this. But I don't mean it offensively. I mean it as a sort of guiding and a warning. Americans tend to only have two settings, I've noticed from living here, on and off, right? And when they're on, they're really on, right? And when they're off, they're totally switched off.
Right.
They don't care. And there is such a great spectrum of other ways to approach things. I went on CNN the other day with what's his name, fake news guy. Well, they all are.
Yeah, I don't know. That doesn't narrow it down for me.
Jim Acosta.
I don't know who that is.
White House. He's the White House correspondent.
Okay.
And he was trying to get me to be aggressive.
Right.
He was saying things that he thought would make me react like a frothing at the mouth right-wing nut job. And he said, like, don't you think that Steve Bannon's approach to all of this is just blowing smoke up his own you-know-where? And I just went, well, Jim, I think you like the cameras too, because he's obsessed with that camera being on him in the White House briefing room. And you can see in his face when you watch that interview back that he's sort of like...
Right.
That really cut him. That really hurt him because it was an ego thing. And that's how we need to play these guys. You look at the how seriously they take themselves.
Right.
If I could say to you, I live by one guiding philosophy, it's take your work seriously and yourself not at all.
Right.
And these guys take themselves seriously and their work not at all.
Nice way of putting it. I agree. I remembered what I had forgotten a few seconds ago. What is it in your personhood, the random combination of genes that make up Raheem, that allowed you to sort of bring yourself out of your religious background, that allowed you to speak the way that you do? I mean, is it just the random luck of one's personhood, or is there something in particular? Were there a set of, I mean, I know you mentioned earlier you watched Carl Sagan and Christopher Hitchens, but is it just down to luck that some of us have the right combination of testicular fortitude and independence of thought to bring ourselves out of the indoctrination that we faced in our childhood? Or are there actual steps that you could, convey to people that would help others follow your lead?
I don't think, look, there will be, of course, some for whom it is not possible to comprehend certain things. And, that's IQ, that's intelligence. But I don't think it's beyond most people to do that and to break out of the mold. I mean, look, let me give you me as an example. Because, here I am. I went to a crappy state school in West London. I mean, a really bad one. I went to the University of Westminster, which is the 117th out of 127 universities in the United Kingdom. It's one of the worst universities you could go to. I mean, community college in the United States would be better. I grew up being told that, religion was my religion and there was nothing else and don't worry about it. But I also grew up being told not to make friends with white people or black people and to stick with my own kind, and you can only trust your own kind and that sort of thing. I worked I worked in retail. I worked selling video games in the equivalent of your electronics boutique or GameStop or whatever in the United Kingdom. I then went on to sell cell phones. I worked in a framing shop. When I graduated university, I went and worked in a call center. None of those things would tell you that this person in less than 10 years' time, I was still selling computer games in 2007.
Wow.
None of those things point to that in less than 10 years' time, this person will be the editor of one of the largest and most influential news sites in the world, will be frequently meeting people within the West Wing of the White House, will be writing a book that is already an Amazon bestseller. So if you're out there right now and you're thinking, oh, it's great that we've got people like Gad and we've got people like Raheem, but, I could never do those things. Yes, you can.
I think this part is maybe the most important part of our chat, irrespective of what we talk about next, because it's precisely that type of motivation that I try to impart on people, because I get a tsunami of letters from people precisely saying what you just said, which is, well, I'm not a famous professor. I don't have your platform. I don't have your background. No, everybody can do it. Now, not everybody will have the trajectory of Raheem in terms of success, but you could challenge your professors in the classroom when they say some bullshit. You could challenge your friends on Facebook. You could challenge somebody at the bar when you're having a conversation. Don't sit idle. Don't be apathetic, right?
You could set up a YouTube channel and enter into competition with you, and you could. There are so many things, and if you're sitting there and you're consuming this, then you're already halfway there.
Right.
So just go the full way. Stop being a pussy.
I agree. And the way that I would rephrase what you said, people ask me what. No. But it's going to be almost as gauche. I say, grow a pair. Okay?
Yeah.
Just grow a pair. I mean, I had a gentleman write to me. And then I actually posted a set of comments which were motivated by him writing to me, because he wrote to me very similar to how others write. Well, I'd really like to get engaged, but I'm afraid of being ostracized, and I'm afraid of my shadow, and I'm afraid of this, and I'm afraid of that. And then my response was, well, grow a pair. I mean, you can't go to war, whether it be literal war or a war of ideas, hoping that there is no chance of you being injured, right? There are casualties in war, whether it be an actual physical war or in the battle of ideas. You don't think that I've had to suffer professionally because of the positions that I take? Of course I have. But, I even worry, of course, about safety issues. I will be meeting with people at my university precisely regarding this matter. But that's the price that you have to pay. If each of us were to diffuse the responsibility onto another, then we're going to certainly die out, right? And so I think the most important part of our conversation is precisely that if people walk away from our conversation saying that, look, everybody could do this. Look, 3 years ago, yes, I was a known professor and so on, but I didn't have a YouTube channel. And then one day I decided to start a YouTube channel. 3 years later, I have almost 100,000 subscribers, almost 8 million views, right? So we could all do it. There's nothing magical. Just get up and do it, right?
And kudos to you, because especially in academia, what an uphill battle that is.
You can't imagine.
I
can't get Raheem. I can't get a single person to exhibit a tiny bit of outrage at the daily endless carnage. But the minute that you have Charlottesville, every disgusting, cowardly academic comes out to virtue signal. So 31,000 plus attacks since 9/11 alone across 67 countries were not able to bring you out of your stupor. But as regrettable as the Charlottesville, obviously nobody condones that. You and I would both agree it was grotesque. But if you felt bad and angry about that, you couldn't give some of your heart and empathy to the 31,000 others?
Right. And you can march 400,000 people down Washington's National Mall to protest the president being inaugurated, but you can't even get 400 people out in Livonia in Michigan to protest female genital mutilation. The Center for Disease Control says that around 500,000 girls in the United States are at risk of this, and you can't put your pink pussy hat on and maybe march on Livonia town center, city center. Don't even make a big stink. Make a little stink. Just make a stink. Any stink.
Do you think that in most of those cases, it's just because they're afraid, or is it that they're misinformed? It's a combination of both. What do you think is driving most of the ostrich behaviors that we're seeing in the West? What's the key cause of it?
Well, I think with regard to radical Islam, or Islam as I like to call it,
Yes.
I think you have this situation where the left have managed to dovetail their open borders agenda with Islam in a way that is now inseparable. And so when we talk about Islam, they see it as an attack on their open border narrative. Now, their open border narrative is actually something completely separate from their pro-Islam stance. But they now view these things as one and the same. And so if they were to accept that there were these problems with Islam, well, then they might have to countenance a travel ban. They might have to accept the idea of enhanced interrogation and extra screening. They might have to say, they might have to read this thing. And that would be terribly uncomfortable, because they see it as it would be an attack on the open borders narrative, the one world agenda. Which I don't know where you stand on this, but I don't want to consider myself a citizen of the world. Being born British is winning the lottery of life, and I will be that way till my dying day. I don't want to consider my home somewhere else, and I'm sure you have very passionate feelings about your home too. Especially because you had to leave it.
Look, my thinking is very much similar to yours, and I'll add a few points. I'm all for diversity when it comes to linguistic diversity, culinary diversity. I love Barcelona, you love Real Madrid diversity. But I don't want diversity when it comes to some people love the Jews and others wish to kill them. Some people love clitorises, others wish to cut them. Some people respect and appreciate gay...
I'm on the upside of that, by the way.
Right. Well, who could hate a clitoris, for God's sakes? But except if you are sexually insecure and you wish to control women's sexuality, then that clitoris is one hell of a dangerous appendage. But anyways...
maybe they're offended by it because they have tiny dicks. And they're the same size of a clitoris.
Please direct all your death threats to Raheem Kassam. So you see, so I love the diversity in its small d sense, but this idea of even tolerating the intolerable because that falls under the rubric of diversity. I don't want that diversity. As a matter of fact, I want one set of values, which are true liberalism, not full liberalism, right? Classical liberalism, the dignity of the individual, right? If you wish to adhere to that, welcome to our society, my brother. If you don't, stay out. I don't want you here.
Just to underscore your point, look at this. The BBC has a show called the Sunday Morning Live in the United Kingdom. And it's usually a political and religious discussion. And they tweeted yesterday morning, "Our first conversation today is our response to grooming gangs racist. Let us know your thoughts." Basically, are you a racist for opposing thousands of girls being raped and groomed by Pakistani immigrants?
It's unbelievable. For those who may not know that reality, although I've discussed it with several people on my show, I think you probably would know all of them, Tommy Robinson, Anne-Marie Waters, they've all come on my show and discussed it. Could you tell us a bit the background of the epidemic of gang rape, grooming reality?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, awfully enough, the worst thing about this was when these grooming gangs, so there was Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Somali, Eritrean, basically these, and sometimes it's just one of those nationalities, but predominantly Pakistani, British, Muslim men. So I say Pakistani, British, which I think is an oxymoron, but
isn't it Asian? It's Asian. You should just say Asian.
So they say Asian. I say either Pakistani or Muslim. And by the way, that really doesn't work here. And they know the reason they do that is because they think that the Americans will think they mean Chinese or Japanese or Korean people. But these are Pakistani men predominantly. And it's been going on for some decades now, whereby in heavily dominated areas by people of this background, they were going to government, what do you call them, foster homes and welfare centers and all this sort of stuff, luring these young girls out, raping them, getting them hooked on drugs, and passing them around basically like a bong at a frat party. And what they were doing to them was I mean, just you listen to the testimonies of this stuff, it just makes my skin crawl. I can barely do it. I mean, I've seen some gruesome stuff and I've heard some gruesome stuff, but to hear from somebody how they had been passed around a room like something like an inanimate object for other people's gratification in this regard. And unfortunately and awfully, and this is what I was starting to say, the first people that started speaking out about this were groups like the British National Party and the English Defence League, who were not exactly the doyens of upstanding political rhetoric, to put it mildly. They had within their ranks genuine racists, genuine white supremacists, and I don't mean people who are proud to be white, I mean people who hate people who aren't white, and that's an important distinction. I have no problem with people who are proud to be white. So the message got mixed up with these groups and and so nobody wanted to take it seriously. The political establishment certainly didn't want to take it seriously because they were, in a lot of these areas, effectively complicit because they were actively turning a blind eye to what was going on. And people have been fired and sacked and have had to retire on massive pensions because of this. And the police were complicit in turning a blind eye to all of this stuff as well. In the meantime, thousands now across 16 cities and towns in the United Kingdom of young, usually white girls, were systematically targeted, raped, groomed, and owned in a lot of senses by these Pakistani men. And nobody wanted to talk about it. And now we started learning about 2 or 3 years ago. Rotherham, that came out. There was 1,400 there. Then we heard about Oxford. Then we heard about Birmingham. And it's all just trickling out because they know if it all comes out at once, you will have 1 million people marching in London, and mostly not from London, by the way, because the Londoners couldn't give a crap. It's like New Yorkers; they couldn't give a crap what happens to the rest of the country. But you would have that many people out on the street, so they're drip feeding this information out and hoping that we're not paying attention or hoping that it gets lost in along the way, and it stops being a lead story on a news site and starts being the 5th or 6th story because it's so routine. I mean, when a terrorist drives a truck through Barcelona now and kills so many people, CNN leads with Charlottesville and Steve Bannon.
And something about Trump. Trump said something that was really buffoonish.
Yeah. And so, we're being conditioned to start, like Sadiq Khan said, the London mayor said, we're being conditioned to accept this stuff as part of our everyday lives. And it's not, and it can't be.
So in the same way that earlier when you gave sort of a very motivational mantra about, everybody can get engaged, I want to try to go back and push against sort of your pessimism of we're doomed, because we want to leave people, we want people to leave this conversation hopefully with an infusion of optimism. Notwithstanding your pessimism, which I regret to say that I share, I think if we truly were fully pessimistic, then we might as well just stay in bed all day. The fact that we're doing this chat might mean that we still hold out some hope that we could turn the ship around.
I don't know. I'm going back to bed after this.
Well, you've got a chat at 11 o'clock according to your publicist, so I don't think so. Maybe after that chat you'll be going to bed. Let's talk about a few sort of actionable things that we could tackle. Number one, immigration. Somewhere between having complete open borders and shutting down the borders to anybody who identifies as Muslim lies the proper response. How do we? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What an extremist thing to say.
What is extreme? Exactly. Well, I as the Ryerson University folks said, I am a Nazi white supremacist. Isn't it
strange that you just advocated a middle of the road position?
Right.
The same immigration system that Australia has had operating for a very long time, and actually indeed Canada had operating before Trudeau basically said we don't have a country anymore, right?
Exactly.
How do we get that? Well, look, I assume that was going to be your question.
Yes.
So the RAISE Act. So the reason we won Brexit is immigration. It was by and away the most talked about issue during the Brexit campaign, and the narrative that we set during that, not because it was a successful narrative, because we genuinely believe in it, is points-based immigration control. Right. So you're a criminal, you lose 50 points on your application. You speak English, you gain 10 points. You got money to bring in, you gain 10 points. You got a long-term degenerative illness, you lose 10 points. And you weigh up.
How many points do you lose for a holy book that, let me translate it to those who don't speak Arabic, says the following: kill, 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 take an espresso break, resume killing. How many points do you lose for that?
3 or 4.
3 or 4. Okay, so it's not that bad. As long as you speak English and you could read from that book, then you're good.
Then you're absolutely fine.
Got it.
No, but I think that's the next conversation we have to have, is that actually so the points-based immigration system is basically the RAISE Act, which is what President Trump is trying to get into the United States now, which is the best way to deal with this stuff. It is the fairest we can get without discriminating to a point where you have to interview somebody for 6 hours at length about their religious views, and that's never going to happen. There's just not the physical manpower. But frankly, I don't want the expansion.
But even then, you could still beat the system, right?
Right, of course. I mean, yeah, lie detectors. I don't know, waterboarding. Who knows? You got to get waterboarded to come into the United States, basically. Right. No, look, I think that's the best way to solve that problem. I wanted to clarify something I just said. I forget now. I'm sure somebody in the comments will pick me up on it. We won the Brexit campaign on that. There's no surprise to me that they're doing that over here. It's no surprise to me that we were trying to model it on what you had as a system and what Australia had as a system. And this is it. So we've got to get away from the word discriminatory used in a negative context. Right. Discrimination is good. Not all discrimination is good, but me discriminating whether I eat cereal for breakfast or eat a brick, that's good discrimination.
I'm going to send you an article I wrote for Psychology Today that exactly makes this point. Because in psychology, the term discrimination is used in several ways. One of which is the nefarious way that most people associate. But for example, you discriminate between two stimuli. You recognize the difference between a green dot and a blue dot. So you're right on. Go on.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly right. So if people say to me, oh, but that's a discriminatory immigration policy. Yes. What's your point? The entire point is to weed out the bad and get the good. You don't. What other way do you do that? Do you reach into your fridge and there's 3 bottles of milk there, and one is obviously from 3 weeks ago, one is from 2 weeks ago, and one is from 1 week ago? Do you go like this and just pull out whichever one? No,
oh
you
my
don't.
God. Are you saying that Muslims are spoiled milk, you disgusting Nazi? I can't believe I'm giving a platform to such bigots.
I'm saying that Sharia supremacists are spoiled milk, yes.
But Imam Rauf, the Ground Zero Mosque, explained to us on CNN that 95% of Sharia is perfectly consistent with the American Constitution. He must have been lying, I guess, or maybe he's confused.
Oh, well, I suppose I better rethink everything then.
All right, what about, let me ask you the next one. I know we only have about, I think, 7 or 8 minutes left, then you have to go off to your next chat. What the idea of reforming Islam, earlier you mentioned a gentleman who is at the forefront of that initiative in Britain. I'm not a strong supporter, not of him. I couldn't care less about him one way or the other, but I'm not a strong supporter of the initiative because I think that it's, sorry to use this old tired cliche, but it's the rearranging of the decks on the sinking Titanic. We don't have 500 years to sit and reinterpret every single syllable of the hadith and of the seerah of Muhammad and the Quran to try to sort of make it nicer. So I think it's completely likely to fail. Do you agree, or do you think that there are doctrinal ways by which you could go into these texts and somehow magically they all come out looking like it's all brotherly love?
Well, I mean, the chances of survival from the Titanic were so low that I probably would have just started rearranging the deck chairs just for fun, while everyone else was running around and screaming and getting saved. But that's just how stupid I am. The initiative itself, I think, is doomed to fail. But I don't mind it, and actually I do encourage it occurring. Because my attitude is if you can drive a wedge internally within Islam, then you might find itself arguing more within itself than arguing with us and litigating here in the West. I'd prefer that they litigated amongst themselves. I think if you drive a wedge between the Ahmadiyyas and Hanafis and Deobandis and Salafis and all that, that's more productive. It's more productive for them and their religion, quite frankly. But I couldn't care less about what's productive for them and their religion. It's more actually productive for us. There's a reason the media is focusing at the moment on this Charlottesville stuff and the neo-Nazi stuff and the Antifa stuff and the alt-right and the alt-left and all that kind of thing, because they know that if the right and the left, that's my left, by the way, I got it the wrong way around. I'm doing it for you guys. If they both come together against the political establishment, against endless wars in Afghanistan, against the fiat banking system, against high taxes, if these two wings realize that they're being repeatedly reamed, then they're a force powerful enough to take down the political establishment. So what is the political establishment's way of doing it? Is set them against each other, right? Divide and conquer, divide and rule. And that's the best thing that can happen with Islam right now, right, is that they fight amongst each other instead of fighting amongst us. And I'm sorry if that sounds, especially to those lefties who are trying to watch this and catch me out on something, I'm sorry if that sounds, mean or unfortunate for them, but I'm worried about our culture and our countries and our security. It's not my business to worry about theirs. And so I support it for that reason. I also support it because I think, just like you said, grow a pair. I think it encourages Muslims to either leave their faith or treat their faith like a buffet car, like right, we said. And I think, look, I'm pretty pessimistic about the future, but and I realize by doing all of this, by the way, we're actually dragging it out and making it more painful, right, by resisting. But who doesn't resist tyranny? Who doesn't? Just because you're doomed to die, it doesn't mean that you don't kick and scream all the way to the gallows.
Well, I think that so my next book that I'm working on is tentatively titled "Death of the West by 1,000 Cuts." Cuts by 1,000 cuts.
Oh, so I thought you said a rude word.
No. That's probably the only word that I genuinely feel uncomfortable ever uttering. I don't think I've ever uttered it, and I don't know what it is about it.
No, it's very North American to feel that way. In England, we use it like we say mate, and we say pal, and we say buddy.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. You'll walk down the street in London, and you'll hear somebody calling somebody else an old. I don't want to say it because I don't know.
Wow. Okay, yeah. There you go. Cultural differences. But anyways, the point of my title is precisely that if we end up losing, it won't come overnight. It will take a long time. But I always tell people, and I think you mentioned this on Tucker when you were talking about, the childless political leaders. That really struck with me. I thought that was such a brilliant insight. Because when people say, well, why do you fight for this? I say, I do it for my children and yours. Perhaps if I didn't have children, if I'm only looking at my life expectancy, well, if, knock on wood, I've got another 40 years, well, then, I might be able to come out of this scot-free, right? But I have children who have 80 years left to live, and they have... So then in that case, that compels me to act. So, but maybe you could just very briefly mention that point that you had mentioned on Tucker, because I thought that was such a powerful point.
Yeah, well, if you look at the major leaders of the European nations, the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Spain, Germany, or the Netherlands, all of them have prime ministers or presidents or chancellors that have no children.
It's fantastic.
And therefore they have no skin in the game. They have no, like you said, they have nobody to think about leaving the world to. They're not worried about what they're leaving to my kids. They don't give a fuck about my kids. Why would they? They never met them. I don't even have kids, so they couldn't have. But the point is this. I understand that as somebody without kids, so it's not something that's hard to appreciate. Everybody knows, well, most people will know, friends who have had children. And you see how they change. You see they are less inclined to take stupid risks in their life. You see that their priorities change.
My fear of flying has come out of nowhere once I had children. I never used to care. Now I'm always thinking, geez, could this be my last moment on Earth?
Yeah, and it just changes people. And it changes everyone. Leaders of countries and political parties and nations would be changed by this stuff too. And it's why, in my estimation, it is the greatest underlying psychological reason why these people don't seem to give a fuck about how their countries are going to look in 30, 40, 50, 60 years.
So new rule for eligibility criteria when you're running for high office. Not only do you have to be 35 and you're born in the United States, you have to have at least more children than the replacement rate, right? I think it's 2.17. If you don't have 3 children or more, you cannot be president because you don't have skin in the game. What do you think? Amendment to the Constitution?
I don't think 3. You can have 2.17.
Okay, at the replacement rate. Got it.
Right.
As we wrap it up, are there any projects that you're currently working on that are not yet public that you might want to promote in this platform?
Well, firstly, please do buy the book. If not for, by the way, I make $1 per book, so you ain't going to make me rich off buying this book. You might keep me in beer for a couple of weeks, which would be very kind. But make sure that you also make sure your elected representatives get it. Not necessarily because you think they'll do something with it. In many cases, they won't. But number one, so they don't have an excuse. Oh, I didn't know that this was coming to a neighborhood near me. I didn't have, nobody warned me. How could I ever foresee this coming? But also because nobody does tell these people. You think they've got these banks of researchers and staffers that tell them all these things. They don't tell them this stuff. They don't know this stuff. So make it your point to do that. So basically, don't buy the book, buy 5 books. And available on Amazon and all that kind of stuff. What I'm working on apart from that at the moment, well, look, I've just signed up to do another book with Regnery Publishing as well. I can't tell you what it's about yet, but it's very contemporaneous with what's going on in the news and with the political left at the moment and the alt left. I suppose if I were to tell you my secret goal for 2017, it would be to have the Muslim Brotherhood designated as a terrorist organization.
In the United States?
In the United States.
Got it. Absolute pleasure. Stay on the line so we could say goodbye offline. Thank you so much. You're a delightful guy. Thank you for your courage. Talk to you soon, Raheem. Cheers.
Thank you.